This happened in a small town just outside of Baltimore County when I was 13. I've lived in the same house since I was about 7 or 8. Like any other small town, it has its fair share of urban legends passed down over the years to scare the kids. I was outside of my house in early October. It was just after dark, the days were getting much shorter and it was getting a lot colder. This was around the same time as all of the clown sightings in 2016. I never really believed anything like that would happen in my small town. But after what happened to me that night, I now know to never say never. After deciding it was much too cold to be outside, I went back into my house where my brother and my friend were. We'll call him Kyle. Kyle was from the Dominican Republic and he'd always believed in the paranormal, so we had a good bit in common. We walked into my brother's room. Since it was much bigger than mine, we decided to hang out in there and watch random videos. A few hours passed, we lost interest, and Kyle remembered that it was a full moon. And then he said, "I bet the clowns will be out tonight." I called bullshit and told him it was all just a hoax. He doubled down by saying, if I don't believe it, that they would get me. I laughed and told him to stop believing in all that stuff. Then my brother, who I'll call Josh, sat up and started mimicking me as if I were a baby. I told him he was a jerk and that it wasn't funny. We argued back and forth for a good 10 minutes when Kyle interrupts and finally says, "Then if you don't believe me, why don't you go prove it?" "Fine," I replied. I told him that I would be back. I know just a place to prove it. There was a little old place down the road. It was cleared out for a park, essentially. It wasn't funded. The only thing that was there was a small walking bridge. It was pretty nice. All of the kids in town call it the Duck Pond. Like I said, during the day it's pretty nice, but at night the whole atmosphere changes. It gets much darker and much creepier. I walked out of my house, grabbed my bike, and rode off 2 blocks away. At the entrance of the park is another set of woods that is private property for houses on the water. For whatever reason, most of them had been abandoned. Coming up on the entrance, it was really easy to see. You can't miss it. I got off my bike and started walking up towards it, when all of a sudden, the smell hit me. Keep in mind that there's a lot of wildlife around, and it wasn't helping that the wind had picked up and I could smell the city dump from a few miles away. Once at the entrance of the park, I stopped to admire the big iron sign that sat on each side of the brick pillars. About to walk into the park when I shit you not, someone had spoke to me in a low, somewhat luring voice. At first, I couldn't tell where it was coming from. All I heard was,
"Hey there, kiddo."
I froze in my tracks and my entire body went stiff, and then again I heard it.
"Why don't you come over here?"
This is when I snapped out of it and went in panic mode. Normally, I am someone who isn't scared off so easily, but this was different. There was some stranger in the woods talking to me. I didn't know where he was or what he had planned. Turning to grab my bike, I see a small patch of bushes out of the corner of my eye move, so naturally, my eyes lock to it. Still trying to adjust my eyesight, I see someone crouched deep in the bushes, facing me. A white painted face and a big red nose. My heart sank, coming to the realization that it was a clown. No way, I thought. They were right, I thought. I didn't care at this point. Working up the courage to make myself move and get out of there, he spoke again.
"That's right. Come over here,"
he said. That's when I knew it was time to go. I took off in sheer panic, wheeling myself onto the bike and trying to pedal away, but my legs were like jello. Screaming at myself to go, I finally managed to get moving. Biking as fast as my legs would take me down the trail, I hear him laughing hysterically behind me. I don't know if he got out of the bushes to chase me. I couldn't work up the courage to look behind me, but the laughs were ringing in my head the entire time I biked back to my house. I threw my bike down in the yard and crashed through the doorway in complete hysteria. Kyle said that I was incomprehensible. It took me a minute to calm down and find the words to explain what just happened. At first, they didn't believe me, and I can't blame them. I wouldn't have either. But they came around after a while, and we all agreed that we would go back and check it out the next day. Not only did we not go back the next day, it's been years and I still have not gone back down there. Creepy clown in the bushes? Whoever you are, wherever you are, let's never meet again. I'll never forget about the summer when I first heard about the traveling fair that set up just outside of town. I was 13, and in a small town as uneventful as ours, anything new was worth checking out. It had all of the usual attractions, like rides that definitely didn't look safe enough to ride, greasy snacks, and games promising prizes that were impossible to win. But something about this fair felt off. I arrived just before sunset. Neon lights flickered against the evening sky, but the music sounded distant and faded. No matter how close I got, the music always sounded fuzzy and unclear. I wandered around, played a few games, grabbed some kettle corn, and then I noticed it. A striped tent at the very edge of the fairgrounds. It wasn't on the map that they handed out at the entrance. There was no sign indicating what was inside, just a faint sound of laughter drifting from within. Curious, I stepped closer and peeked through the entrance. Inside, the lighting was dim, overhead bulbs barely casting any light, so it took a few minutes for my eyes to adjust. But when they did, I saw a small stage stood in the center, a lone performer standing on it, a clown dressed in a tattered red and white suit with oversized shoes. His face was painted a stark white with darkened eyes and an unnervingly wide smile smeared as if the paint had been on too long. He didn't speak, he only moved. His gestures were slow and deliberate, like he was acting out a silent story only he understood. Few people in the audience barely paid attention, but I couldn't look away. Every time I thought about leaving, his gaze would snap to me. His movements became sharper and more deliberate, as if he was performing for just me. A chill would run down my spine, and I was finally able to back out of the tent. By then, the sun had fully set, and the fair was beginning to close. I decided to take the shortcut home, through a wooded trail I had walked the path a dozen times before, but that night, it was different. The trees loomed taller, it was much darker, the air was thick and cold. I shook off the unease, blaming the strange energy of the fair, and I kept walking. Then I heard it, the unmistakable crunch of footsteps behind me. I stopped and turned around, shining my phone's flashlight into the trees. Nothing, just empty woods. I started walking again, and the sound returned, closer this time. Hello? I called, my voice was unsteady. Silence. I walked faster, the footsteps quickened, matching my pace. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, and suddenly, I knew I wasn't alone. I turned again, and there he was, the clown. Standing just a few feet away from me, his grin frozen in place. He didn't move, he didn't speak. His head only tilted from side to side while watching me. "What do you want?" I whispered, backing away. No answer. Then slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out nothing. Just an empty hand, but the motion, it felt intentional, like a challenge. I ran. Branches whipped past me as I tore through the woods, the sound of heavy footsteps thundering behind me. I didn't dare look back. Finally, the trees gave way to the familiar side of my street. I sprinted onto the pavement, gasping for air. When I finally turned around, the clown was gone. But as I stepped onto my porch, my stomach twisted. A few weeks passed, and the fair had long since packed up and left town, leaving behind nothing more than an empty field of trampled grass. One night I woke up to a noise outside of my window. My room was on the ground floor, facing the woods, so it didn't make sense for anyone to be there. My heart pounded as I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it towards the glass. At first, I saw nothing, just trees swaying in the breeze. Then, a shadow moved at the edge of my vision. The clown. He was standing at the tree line, half hidden in the darkness, his painted face barely visible in the dim light. He lifted a hand slowly and pointed directly at me. I scrambled backwards, nearly falling off my bed. When I looked back, he was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even move from my bed. I didn't feel safe until the sun came up. When I finally worked up the courage to check outside, I found something stuck to my window, a single playing card, the Joker. I don't know how he found me, and I don't know what he wants. I don't know if he's still out there, waiting, watching, but every night I check my window just in case. This story takes place around mid-2016, right in the heat of the whole killer clown trend. A lot of people have stories from this time, and mine isn't as scary on paper, but actually having it happen to you, yeah, that's scary. This was around fall break of 2016. My cousin and I were both in middle school, me in 8th grade, him in 7th. I was staying over at his house one night. There were quite a few people in the house that night. Me, my cousin, his 10-year-old brother, his 3-year-old sister, 3-month-old baby brother, his dad, and his stepmom. Before I get into the story, let me try and explain the layout of the house and their yard. They lived in a rather large double-wide trailer that they had bought and had flattened out on part of a hill. Their driveway is a rather steep gravel slope that connected to the road at the bottom of the hill. Behind the house, up the hill, was nothing but woods. The nearest house was slightly down the hill to the left, closer to the road. That was my grandparents' place. Okay, now that you have a bit of a visual of the layout, here's what happened that night. As I already mentioned, the house was quite full, but it was late and my cousin and I were the only ones still awake. We were watching TV, probably some sitcom on Nick at Night or something. We kept hearing noises coming from the woods behind the house. We could see into the woods from the window in the living room where we were sitting, but we didn't pay much attention to it since it was kind of windy outside. Plus, my uncle had a lot of motion lights outside of the house. They were everywhere. They were in the back facing the woods, by the side door, close to the driveway, on the opposite side of the house, and even on the slightly elevated porch that overlooked the front yard and the road. So we weren't too worried about anyone or anything actually being outside, since anything out there would have triggered the lights. We had heard a lot of stories and watched a lot of YouTube videos about the whole killer clown thing, and to be honest, I didn't think it was real. I thought it was just prank videos, something made up just to get clickbait views. Besides, even if they were real, I live in a small enough town in northeast Tennessee where everyone and their dog owns some sort of firearm, and my uncle's no different. He's a retired veteran, so we were never afraid of anyone dressing up as a clown and trying to jump out at us for a quick scare or a funny video reaction. We were sitting on the couch watching the previously mentioned TV show, the only light on being the TV and the dim light above the kitchen sink that was only a few feet behind the couch, when suddenly the back motion detector light came on. We did notice but didn't think anything of it. The lights were set on 10-minute timers. If it detected one movement, it would stay on and would turn off after 10 minutes. We waited the 10 minutes, then the lights turned off. We figured it was just an animal, which wasn't uncommon. After about 20 minutes, I went to the bathroom down the hall. I did my business and I washed my hands. When I came back out, I noticed that the motion light on the side of the house by the side door that entered into the laundry room had come on. It was shining through the thin blinds that were on the door. I swore I heard what sounded like footsteps on the gravel outside of the door. Then the doorknob started rattling, quickly, like someone was trying to open it. I ran into the living room and got back into my spot on the couch. Luckily the blinds were shut, so whatever it was didn't see me. I knew my cousin heard the same thing as I did, because he was already up and halfway into his dad's room to wake him up. At that point, I was still sitting on the couch waiting for them to come back, and then I saw the light for the front porch come on, and for whatever reason that I cannot explain, I got up and I looked out the window. Standing there in the middle of the window, looking out onto the porch, I didn't see anything. Then, out of nowhere, my uncle stormed past me and flung the door open with a pistol and flashlight in his hand. Standing on the porch and panning the flashlight back and forth, he was looking for whoever or whatever set off the motion detector. I was still standing in the window when I saw the flashlight stop and lock onto something. I couldn't see what he had stopped on, so I walked out onto the porch behind him, and that's when I saw it. There, at the bottom of the hill in the ditch next to the road, was a clown. A clown with a crappy costume, one from probably like Walmart or Spirit of Halloween. It just looked at us and waved. So my uncle, with the flashlight still locked onto this clown, waved right back at him, then fired a warning shot into the air. The clown jumped up out of the ditch and ran across the road into the woods. My cousin and I didn't sleep that night, even though my uncle stayed on the porch for most of the night, making sure that no one came back. I remember him telling us a few weeks later that not long after he fired the shot, he heard what sounded like an ATV starting up and driving away. Troublesome kids were always and still are an issue in that area. There are houses there that are somewhat close to each other, but still far enough apart that you can't see them. Like I said, the only house that we could see from my uncle's place was my grandparents' that was basically on the same property. I don't doubt that it was just a high school kid playing a prank and just trying to get a cheap scare from whoever was in the house. Years later, after reading some more experiences that people have had with these clowns, people being threatened and actually put in real danger, it still scares me to think that what if it wasn't a high school kid looking for a cheap scare, and what would have happened if he got into the house?